All right, welcome sports fans, football fans to a Thursday episode of the Call Sheet Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Smith, here on the Fans First Sports Network. And today we begin kind of a new feature on the show where once a week, probably later on in the week, I'm going to pick an NFL team and we'll profile that team, sort of do a state of the franchise. And this is a very timely team. I just so happened to pick as the first installment of this, the Dallas Cowboys. And that was actually before the big news involving Dallas and Pittsburgh trading George Pickens went down. So this is a very timely conversation that I'm going to have with one of our FFSN contributors here who covers the Dallas Cowboys, Michael Davis. Going to bring Michael in right now. Welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate you having me, Kevin. I'm excited for the Cowboys, especially after the news broke yesterday, and I'm excited.
Yeah, we didn't arrange this after the trade. This was sort of set up beforehand, and it obviously gives us a lot to talk about. We're gonna get into the Pickens trade, why the Steelers do it, why the Cowboys do it, how's it benefit Dallas, etc. But before we do that, let's just take a sort of more global view of the Dallas Cowboys. They are clearly one of the marquee franchises in all of American professional sports. Once obviously had the moniker America's team. I don't know if that is still a common phrase that's being used with the Cowboys, but they're absolutely a team that gets a lot of attention. And from an outsider's perspective, Michael, I'm going to ask you to talk about this in a second, but from an outsider's perspective, there's a lot of questioning about why is Dallas still such a marquee franchise? This is a team that hasn't really made any noise in the postseason since the 1990s. Why do you think Dallas is still such an attraction nationally?
I feel like that's a lot of what Jerry Jones has done, keeping them in the media. I mean, they'll make, some weird moves like George Pickens earlier this week, or they won't make any noise in free agency. But the Dallas Cowboys, if people remember, if you were an NFL fan, we didn't have NFL Sunday Ticket back in the 80s and the 90s when the Cowboys were big. So especially where I'm from North Carolina. I was born after the 90s dynasty, but my dad was a Cowboys fan, and he's like, you either got to watch the Cowboys or the Redskins or sometimes the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you basically pick between one of the three. So I feel like that's why the Steelers are also an American popular team, but the Cowboys are America's team. Whether you love them or whether you hate them, you have an opinion on the Dallas Cowboys, and they're always in the media, and everybody will always have an opinion on them. And that's why I don't think whether the Cowboys are 17-0 or 0-17, that America's team moniker will always stay with the Cowboys.
It's a good point. I'm older than you. I grew up a Steelers fan. The Steelers Cowboys rivalry was intense. The first football game I ever remember watching as a little kid, very little kid, was Super Bowl 10 Steelers Cowboys. And it was more, in a way, it was more than just football, right? You had Pittsburgh at the time in the 1970s and into the early 80s as this sort of dying steel town. And Dallas, on the other hand, as one of those cities in the Midwest and Western United States that was on the rise, that was new and it was shiny. And the Cowboys had the star on their helmet and the Steelers wore black. It was just such a juxtaposition of two franchises and towns that seem to represent different things in America. But the Cowboys have really struggled to maintain the level of excellence that they had throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Why do you think that is? What's been a reason for Dallas's failure to be able to make noise in the postseason?
Well, I feel like there's two contributing factors, and everybody points back to the 1990s, what made them successful. And I think it was Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson was a brilliant head coach and came from the college ranks and came to the NFL and just had success with the Cowboys. And that team was loaded. And that was before the salary cap. So Jerry Jones could use his oil-based money to get whatever player he wanted and sign the check that he was super comfortable in making because he had all this money to work with. And now what the Dallas Cowboys have to do is they have the same salary cap as every other NFL team. So there's more intentionality, or should be, when it comes to balancing the checkbook with what players make. And obviously Jerry Jones gets in his head. He looks at his dollar amount and he's like, we don't have enough money for this player or that player. Or he takes way too long on some of these decisions. CeeDee Lamb should have been signed months prior. Dak Prescott should have been signed months prior. That saves you at least 15 million in cap space that you could have went and added a contributing player to your team. So I feel like Jerry Jones in the last 30 years hasn't adjusted to the salary cap. And after firing Jimmy Johnson, Jerry's really wanted the attention on himself. And that's a perception that the national media has. That's a perception that Cowboys fans have. You could see that displayed this past year when Jerry Jones was being questioned by local media and threatened to have them fired. He's like, somebody else can ask me these questions, because Jerry Jones just didn't like the questions. And so while Jerry Jones is the main focus in Dallas, I feel like, yes, he's the owner. He bought the team. He can technically do whatever he wants with the team if you own it. But when it comes to a football perspective, I feel like the fans deserve a little bit better, and Jerry just hasn't adjusted. And I'm a wrestling fan as well. You can see from the background on the video feed, but I feel like that's the Vince McMahon syndrome. Success in the 90s, didn't want to change his ways, and people 30 years later are like, what are you doing? You're hurting this organization by trying to do things like you did back in the 1990s when you don't have that structure in place anymore.
Interesting. It's a good point about waiting to extend these guys, because you know how it goes. If you wait and now somebody else at that position gets a new deal, then the bar just gets raised significantly. And it's kind of like whoever's next in line will set the market, and everybody that comes after him, they're going to get above that current deal. And so now you're going to have to play that game with Micah Parsons as well, which will be very interesting. And as a Steelers fan, Pittsburgh's thinking about extending TJ Watt. It's almost like a game of chicken, who's going to blink first in order to get that done. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And especially with Micah Parsons, a guy who says he wants to be with the team. He wants to be with the Dallas Cowboys. He doesn't want to go anywhere else. Why don't you just sit with him in a room for 6, 7, 8 hours on end each day, like you're trying to renegotiate the CBA, and get a deal done before, your Pittsburgh Steelers go and re-sign TJ Watt? And Micah's like, oh, I'm actually better than TJ Watt. I want to make more money than him. I don't want to be the second highest paid guy. I want to be the highest paid guy. It doesn't make sense why you would wait when the market always gets reset.
Yeah, it is. It is amazing how the teams that are successful in the NFL in the salary cap era are not simply great at managing football, but they're also great at managing money. And that sounds like, from your, what you're telling us, that this has been one of the big stumbling blocks, obviously, for Jerry Jones. But okay, let's take a closer look at this Cowboys team. All right, the state of the Cowboys. They're coming off a season where they went 7-10, finished third in the NFC East. They've added some nice pieces. They didn't do a whole lot in free agency, but Tyler Booker, the big interior lineman from Alabama, is a mauler, and a guy who I think that any team would want at the center of their offensive line. I mean, Donovan Azareco, the edge rusher from Boston College. A quick story about him. I coached against him. He went to Williamstown High School. I coached here at Ocean City High School in New Jersey. The weirdest ending to a football game I've ever experienced. It was the COVID year, 2020, and the game got called at halftime because Williamstown, that Donovan Azareco, who he played for, a player of theirs who had been with the team earlier in the day, had gone home sick from school, tested positive for COVID, but by the time the positive test happened, the game had already kicked off. They literally had to have somebody drive to the game and inform the officials that Williamstown's team had been around a positive COVID test. They canceled the game at halftime. Never been a part of anything like that in my life. So, but anyway,
Wow.
yeah, exactly. So he's an exciting prospect to pair opposite of Micah Parsons. And then now, obviously, the Pickens trade. Where are you on the state of the Cowboys? Is the arrow up? Is it down? Where is it pointed?
It's kind of in the middle. And it's really weird because you always look at the Dallas Cowboys, and honestly, you could look at them for the past 10, 15 years, and you look at the depth chart and you can just look on paper and just see the talent oozing from this depth chart. And the Dallas Cowboys historically draft really, really well and don't spend money in free agency. And I think this is one of my favorite drafts. We didn't get a star wide receiver. We ended up trading for George Pickens this week, but you go back to what made Dallas successful 10 years ago when they were drafting Tyron Smith and Zach Martin and Travis Frederick, all who have since retired. Martin and Tyron Smith retiring this offseason. And you go out and you spend a first-round pick on Tyler Smith a few years ago, a first-round pick on Tyler Guyton last year, and a first-round pick on another Tyler Booker this year, who I am just like in love with. And this is a guy who wanted Matthew Golden as a wide receiver too. I think he's super fast. I think he can not beat Tyreek Hill, but he can blow the top off the defense. And we go for a guard. And the more I start digging into him, he loves making his opponents lose their love for football. And when you could go on Micah Parsons' podcast and say that, okay, that's the type of dude I want on my team. But you look at, there's still some holes. Like, is George Pickens going to be that wide receiver too? Is George Pickens going to not have these on-field antics he had in Pittsburgh? The running back position. I'm really high on Jadon Blue from Texas. I think he can end up emerging as a starter, but Miles Sanders, he's washed. I covered the Carolina Panthers for Fans First Sports Network a couple years ago, and Javonte Williams didn't do much in Denver. And then you look at defensively. Defensively, we had a lot of injuries last year that really derailed this team, but they're going to start with some injuries as well. The rookie corner from ECU, Siobhan Revel Jr., he's coming off an ACL injury. He might be back for the start of the season, but he's going to be adjusting, not only playing off a torn ACL, but also adjusting to the NFL game. Trayvon Diggs is expected to miss time. And so you're looking at, okay, maybe they can go after a veteran corner. Like, we could have Stephon Gilmore reunite with the Dallas Cowboys. I wrote an article on Fans First about that. DeMarvion Overshown, the best linebacker, the bright spot of the defense last year, he's expected to miss at least half the year because of a devastating knee injury. This is like his second in 3 years. So there's injury concerns, there's run defense concerns, and there's running game concerns. And with all three of those, it's like you can get into the season and be like, okay, we're starting to click through the training camp, through the preseason, the work you've done. Or you can get there and just be like, we're getting manhandled, because Dallas doesn't have an easy schedule either. And I feel like people really need to give this Cowboys team grace, because they're not playing a cupcake schedule. It's tough.
Yeah. That division, obviously Philly, Super Bowl champ, Washington rapidly improving. I think the Giants have really helped themselves this offseason. So it's absolutely going to be a grind in the NFC East. All right, let's get to Pickens, because this is fascinating. I'll just tell you from the perspective of somebody who covers the Steelers. George Pickens is a phenomenally talented wide receiver. He will be a tremendous complement to CeeDee Lamb, because you can't double them both. If you double them both now, you're going to lighten the box, and the Cowboys should be talented enough up front to be able to run the football. Pickens is going to win a lot of one-on-ones. He's a great jump ball guy. He lacks the ability to run a real complete route tree, but man, that's what CeeDee Lamb does really well. So you can probably isolate Pickens and limit his route tree and really play to his strengths. But here's the challenge, and you mentioned it briefly, but I'll expand on it. George Pickens is unbelievably high maintenance. I mean, the number of times where the Steelers veterans, whether it was Watt or Cam Hayward or Russell Wilson had to counsel him on the sidelines because he was throwing a temper tantrum, because he wasn't getting the football or things weren't going his way, et cetera. I can't even begin to count the number of times that happened. And Mike Tomlin is a tremendous manager of big personalities. He has had tremendous success with that, managing the likes of Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant and guys like that. To have Mike Tomlin, I don't want to say he gave up on George Pickens, but he was publicly critical of Pickens in a way that he has not been about other receivers or other players. And to me, that speaks volumes. So I guess my question to you is this: understanding the management that this staff is going to have to do with George Pickens. And now you've got a new staff in place with Brian Schottenheimer and Clayton Adams and a new OC, et cetera. Do you feel like the Cowboys can get him right? Do they have that kind of leadership both in the locker room and on the coaching staff to handle a guy like Pickens?
Now, what Dallas has done well historically is they've managed some pretty high maintenance wide receivers. They went out and got Terrell Owens back in the Tony Romo days, but if I'm not mistaken, Bill Parcells was the coach.
Yeah.
That is a veteran head coach. He had seen it all, heard it all. And then you had Des Bryant, who was under the tutelage of originally Wade Phillips for about half a year, and then Jason Garrett took over. Jason Garrett was around the Jimmy Johnson tree and understood like Des was going to have his sideline antics and he wanted the ball, but Des Bryant never really had on-field issues that cost his team in game. He would get upset on the sideline for sure, but what I see from George Pickens, and correct me if I'm wrong, but his on-field antics led to 15-yard penalties or just losing sight of what was at hand. And that is what's concerning to me. If you look at this draft class, for example, Dallas didn't really get a star wide receiver. They never drafted a receiver. But what Brian Schottenheimer did do is he drafted high character, high quality guys. He drafted team captains. That was the bulk of what he drafted, especially on day 3. And so for Brian Schottenheimer to have this formula of we want high character guys on our football team to then go trade for George Pickens, again, very, very talented.
Yep.
But Dallas has a history of shooting themselves in the foot. And that's either through false start penalties, holding penalties, a guy gets too emotional on defense and, makes a terrible play, and that's a 15-yard unnecessary roughness. I am worried about Brian Schottenheimer handling George Pickens in his first year. But I think the move was made because they want to win. Like Brian Schottenheimer's like, I'm a first-time head coach. I need all the talent in the world, and I want to put myself in the best position to win. And if you look at that wide receiver room, George Pickens, talent-wise, is head and shoulders above anyone else Dallas has.
It seems like a move the Cowboys, I don't want to say they had to make it, but it was almost too tempting to pass up. And if you're a coach, you're going to bet on yourself. You're going to bet that you can fix a guy or get a guy right, that maybe George Pickens just needs a change of scenery, that maybe he needs to be in a different environment. And whether that means that you've got to spend a little more time counseling, so be it. That the trade-off for what he can bring on the football field is worth it. I would think that that's probably where they're coming from.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, if this works out, great. Wrote an article yesterday for Fans First Sports Network about this is basically a 1-year rental.
Yeah.
And this is what's interesting is you always see this from players. If they are in a contract year, they want the most amount of money as possible. So they'll immediately jump their performance up to another level that we hadn't seen before. The Cowboys experienced that with DeMarco Murray, let him walk to Philadelphia, and then he was never the same again. And you also have to make the best case for yourself. If you're on a probationary period with your job and you're wanting a better contract or you're wanting more money, you're going to be on your best behavior. And so I think this was the right time for Dallas because George Pickens could be on his best behavior, have a career year, and he could sign a massive contract with another team next year. And maybe that's Dallas. Maybe that big contract is with Dallas, and this is a long-term relationship. But this is just dating. This is dating for a few months, see if you like each other, see if you gel with each other. And if it doesn't work out, you give up a third-round pick.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting. The Cowboys are just 2 years removed from being one of the favorites in the NFC. They still have the bulk of that roster together. They do have challenges, like you mentioned, because obviously they're in a tough division, tough schedule. But who knows, right? With the new coaching staff and the addition of some of this talent, they may make more noise than people are expecting. So I'm going to get you out of here on this, Michael. I live near Philadelphia. Eagles fans absolutely hate the Cowboys. Who's the team that the Cowboys hate the most? I feel like the Cowboys are the target of a lot of teams' dislike, so to speak. Who's that come back on as a Cowboys fan?
So it's definitely Philadelphia.
Okay.
It has to be Philadelphia.
Okay.
And the reason being is Washington, yeah, there's the old rivalry of Washington and Dallas back when the Washington team was the other name. And the Giants, like, they've won 2 Super Bowls. And so you had the Eli Manning years. Eli obviously winning the first game in Jerry World. Didn't sit well with Cowboy fans, but there is something about Philadelphia fans that are just so obnoxious. You're laughing because you live in Philadelphia.
You're not the first person to say this, Michael.
You're laughing because you live in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
What I call Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
And it's just, they have a certain moxie about them. And then you look at the current team of who are really, really talented. I mean, Howie Roseman has done a phenomenal job. And half the time I wish Jerry Jones would write a check and say, Howie, I will have you leave the Eagles to come be the general manager of the Cowboys, because Howie Roseman, the way he's able to manipulate money and draft picks and have a contract and then somehow get out of a bad contract when it doesn't work out and, trade for this player, that player, how he trade for AJ Brown is absolutely disgusting. It's just the way he's able to assemble that roster. And then you have Nick Sirianni, who is just, he has a punchable face. And that's a common theme that wrestling fans will say about certain wrestlers. You have a punchable face. He's a heel. You just love to hate him. No, we absolutely hate Nick Sirianni, and Eagle fans don't make it much better. Washington hasn't been relevant until this year with Jayden Daniels. They had that one rookie year with RG3. The Giants had the Eli era, but the Cowboys head-to-head with the Giants would usually beat the Giants. The Eagles is what really gets under the Cowboys' skin.
Interesting. Hey, a good, healthy rivalry is one of the things that makes football such a phenomenal sport, and something I think we all look forward to as much as we do rooting for our own team is rooting against somebody else's team.
And that tush push, man, like, let's just ban it. Let's ban the tush push. It's glorified. Like, you can't be pushing another guy, and I need skill. I need skill with my football. And if Philadelphia can't win a Super Bowl with skill, they really don't deserve to be in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Good stuff. Spoken like a true Cowboys fan. Michael, what do you got going on at FFSN these days?
Well, dropped an article about George Pickens, why the Dallas Cowboys made the move that they did. And I'll also be covering some of the risks that come with the George Pickens deal. And WWE Backlash is also coming up this Saturday. So I'm writing some wrestling content for Fans First Sports Network. And Fans First is also partnered with my YouTube platform, Boom Broadcasting, where I do a sports show called Out of Pocket. I do some of the Cowboys podcast, video feed on Boom, audio on Fans First. And we do a lot of content over there too. So if I'm not writing for Fans First, if I'm not doing a podcast for Boom Broadcasting, I am consuming both wrestling and sports. So what a life to be living.
Living the dream. It's a beautiful thing. Michael, I appreciate your time. This was great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to hear some of your other teams that you get to cover this offseason. And if you ever want to collaborate again, I would love to.
You got it. Thank you very much. All right. So That is our Thursday episode of the Call Sheet Daily with our focus on the Dallas Cowboys. Join me tomorrow for our last show of the week, where Pez from Pez's Picks is back on the program, and Pez and I are announcing a new venture together on tomorrow's show. So tune in for that. We got some exciting plans and collaborations that we'll be working on. For Michael Davis, this is Kevin Smith. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody.